Well, good morning. Welcome once again to Grace. God's grace. His church, His grace. Yeah. I just have to take this moment to give a congratulations to Terry. Basketball team was successful. Great game yesterday. Yeah. No, he'll have to tell you the story because he's been waiting for this for a long time. Yeah, so that's good. So glad. Then also, I am glad that you're here with us in our series of sermons that we're doing on God with us from the book of Luke, the Gospel of Luke. I want to try and put it in a bit of perspective this morning, and first of all, just by simply thinking about what it would be like to be in Palestine, say, 2,000 years ago. Because here I am, I've got my nifty little iPad. From my iPad here, I could pop on to CNN right here and find out what's going on in the world, or ESPN, and you could be listening to the football game if there was one right now. Nobody'd even know, except God. But so if we think about what it would be like to be living in Palestine, say 2,000 years ago, how did they get their news? How did they know what was going on? How did these events get from place to place? And if there was an earthquake someplace, or there was a great storm someplace, or if the emperor had changed and was coming to visit a town or a place, how did these things get to them? And we need to understand that at that time, they didn't have printed books, magazines, or newspapers. In fact, if they were to see something printed much at all, it would probably be in the synagogue, and there would be the scroll. But those scrolls were very valuable. So it would be the priest who would take the scroll, and as we saw when Jesus went to the synagogue, the priest gave him the scroll, and he read the passage of Scripture. So for the common, ordinary person, number one, they would rarely ever see a scroll, and number two, they would rarely get to actually touch one, and almost never would they own one. So to hold it or to read it would be especially rare and especially precious. Also, there's no telegraph. Boy, that's been a long time, hasn't it been, since we talked about telegraph? The Morse code. Does anybody know Morse code? And then there was no telephone to get news back and forth. Obviously, no radio, no TV, no internet, no electronic media, none of these gadgets, and some would say, amen. And but yet news of events would spread from village to village. Yet news would come to a place, and in this village, it would go from home to home until there would be this story that would develop of an event that happened. And the story that, as it came to the village, it would settle into being a common story. So what would happen is, as you went from home to home, you'd notice the same story. Then from village to village, you'd hear the same story, because it was important for them to, number one, be able to get the news out, whatever there was, and to get it out accurately. There was no point in embellishing it, but what would happen is everyone would know this story, but some folks had the ability to tell the story better. And by telling the story better, it doesn't necessarily mean they had this wild imagination to make it, just come alive with all this other stuff, but they were able to get the message across and to be able to tell it in such a way that they were recognized in their villages as being storytellers. And these storytellers then would be the right people to go to if you wanted to get news of what was happening. They wouldn't change or modify it because people would know. It's like, in your family, when you meet for, say, the holidays, Chinese New Year's coming up, and when families get together, they have stories to tell. I'll tell you when it really happens, and this is particularly in Asia, is when you have, when they celebrate grave cleaning day. And the family goes out to the grave, and I've seen them because I used to live across from a graveyard. The pizza guy didn't like it, but it didn't bother me at all. So lived across from the graveyard, and in the grave cleaning day, I'd see these families come, and they'd bring something to eat, and they'd do some cleaning and so forth, and they'd sit and they'd talk. And what would happen is they would share stories about this one whose grave they're at, that they're honoring and so forth. And these stories would be told down through the generations, time after time, and they wouldn't change because somebody would say, "That's not what you said last year," and they would keep it going. So we can see how these stories would go, and especially when you have a verbal history, it's very important then to be able to pass these stories down. For me, I can tell when we sing an old hymn and somebody's changed the words. Because I've been singing those hymns since I was old enough to sing, whenever that was, and still not old enough to sing. But anyway, I've known these things, and so when I hear a hymn or a song and the words change, I'm going, that doesn't sound right. So I say that because this is what was happening at this time, and when Luke is doing his research for writing this book, he's going around to the villages in Syria and Palestine, and he's listening to the stories that are told by these accredited storytellers. And they had stories that about this one Jesus guy who had been from place to place, and the stories about Jesus, because there was a crowd that followed him that went from actually eyewitnesses then who would go to these villages and tell the things that they saw and the things that they heard. And now Luke travels from these villages, and he hears these common stories that are repeated over and over again by the accredited storytellers who knew what they were doing. So the thing is about this, though, is that history and the events of history are not secret. I think that's important for us to remember. The reason I say that is this. I have a book in my library that's entitled The Secret History of the World as Laid Down by the Secret Societies. And I'm going, really? We really don't know that there's a secret society who knows what the history is and we don't know what it is? I don't believe that. I just don't believe that. In fact, I'm very suspicious of things when they have, we have the secret society, and we have these secret rites, or we have these secret... I'm very suspicious about that because Jesus was never a very secret person. He was very public, and so is our belief and our practice and our worship. It's intended to be very, very public. So when we talk about secret history, it doesn't jive with the whole history of things. Now, there may be somebody's take on it, but maybe they have to keep it secret because everybody knows it's kind of bogus anyway. But my point is, Luke was in touch with solid, reliable evidence. It went right back to the early events. In fact, it was Plato who said that he thought verbal history was more reliable than written history. Because with verbal history, you can look the person right in the eyes and you can tell whether they're telling the truth or not. And whereas you don't know who's written the words there, and you don't have any verification unless you go back to its source. So for us today, it's a little bit different. I'll tell you, especially in our electronic age, almost all my books, not almost, as many as possible are ebooks. I like ebooks. Why? Because they just don't weigh very much. But it occurred to me, so what if somebody starts changing the Bible and everything is electronic and you don't have a written copy? What are you going to do? You can't change the written copy so well. So I think there's a good purpose for having a written book, but at the same token, I think it's also very important that we as parents begin to teach our children these stories, whether they be Bible stories, whether they be historical events. We teach our children about our families. We teach them the heritage and so forth, and it's almost entirely verbal. I doubt that you have a biography that you give to your children and say, read this book, it's all about our family. So the same thing is true in our Christian experience, and this is what Luke was doing, is he was getting in touch with these things. So Luke knows of these other writings. Now, and the reason I say that is this because I want for us, just for a moment, to go back and listen to how Luke opens this book. He opens this book by saying, "Inasmuch as many have undertaken to compile a narrative of the things that have been accomplished among us, just as those who from the beginning were eyewitnesses and ministers of the word have delivered them to us. It seemed good to me also, having followed all things closely for some time past, to write an orderly account for you, most excellent Theophilus, that you may have certainty concerning the things that you have been taught. So, it seems now that with Paul and the apostles going out and telling the story that Luke is beginning to notice that on the fringes now there's some changes taking place in the story. So he's going back as far as he can to these who have been eyewitnesses, storytellers to the eyewitnesses, and he's bringing this information together. Why is that important? I'll tell you why, folks. Because our Bible has some very fantastic things in it. I remember it was at our baptism thing, we were starting with the Luke chapter 1 about the angels and so forth. And we'll read through our Bible and we'll see these angels and so and stories about angels. And it's like, okay, it's all real, it's all cool, you know. And yet we read our children these fairy tales about the Tooth Fairy and Santa Claus and Cinderella and stuff like this, and we all realize, hey, that's fairy tales. But when we talk about angels in the Bible, no, that's gospel fact. And then we have other religions and other cultures who have their stories about these things too, and we tend to say, oh, no, that can't be right, but we're right. And my point is, while I would agree with that, I would say to you that we need to have some kind of basis for making those statements as to what we believe and why we believe. And that's why I'm saying to you that as we go into chapter 7 here, there's some pretty phenomenal events that take place. And I want to caution us, you, all of us, that we don't just zip right through it like, whoa, you know, that's just how it is. We need to understand how this came about and how these stories came to us and why we can give them some kind of reliability to them. And we've already seen how Jesus has performed several miracles, even casting demons out. Now, there's a whole thing right there about the demons. There's some discussion as to whether or not this is real or whether it's psychosomatic or how it comes about. Whether or not there is this spiritual world out there of and we as Christians should believe it. I mean, after all, God is a spirit, and those who believe in Him worship Him in spirit and in truth. And so we understand there is a spiritual world, but we tend to say, well, this is our spiritual world. I'm not sure about this other person's spiritual world and how these things work. And we're so bombarded by what is called science, and saying that it has to be a part of the senses and so forth. I'm saying to you that we need to be careful as we read through these events of demons and sicknesses and blindness and like the paralyzed man with his crippling disability, how he was amazingly healed and Jesus forgives him of his sins. And then, what about the fishing? Jesus tells Peter to go out and go fishing, and he hasn't caught anything all night, and suddenly 2 boats are full to sinking. The fishes are listening to Jesus. So we see that in the spiritual realm, in the physical realm, in the natural realm, this Jesus who has every appearance of being just like you and us, me, whatever, just like us. He doesn't look any different. If he walked in this room, he would just be as plain as anybody else. And yet, we're going to accept what he is saying here. In chapter 7, there's some remarkable things recorded, and we'll look through those. I want for us to, before we go into chapter 7, to turn our Bibles to that chapter, Luke 7, and read a passage of Scripture from Luke, beginning with verse 18. And the reason I want to read this passage is because it's about a very godly man whom was sent to be the announcer, the preparer for the way of Jesus. And here's what he does. The disciples of John reported all these things. When it says reported all these things, we'll go back and we'll see the things that were reported, how fantastic they are. And John, then, calling 2 of his disciples to him, sent them to the Lord, saying, "Are you the one who is to come, or shall we look for another?" This is John the Baptist saying this. And when the men had come to Jesus, they said, "John the Baptist has sent us to you, saying, 'Are you the one who is to come, or shall we look for another?'" In that hour, he, Jesus, healed many people of diseases and plagues and evil spirits. And on many who were blind, he bestowed sight. And he answered them, "Go and tell John what you have seen and heard. The blind receive their sight, the lame walk, lepers are cleansed, and the deaf hear. The dead are raised up, the poor have good news preached to them, and blessed is the one who is not offended by me." When John's messengers had gone, Jesus began to speak to the crowds concerning John. "What did you go out into the wilderness to see? A reed shaken by the wind? What then did you go out to see? A man dressed in soft clothing? Behold, those who are dressed in splendid clothing and live in luxury are in king's courts. What then did you go out to see? A prophet? Yes. I tell you, and more than a prophet. This is he of whom it is written, Behold, I send my messengers before your face, who will prepare your way before you. I tell you, among those born of women, none is greater than John. Yet the one who is least in the kingdom of heaven is greater than he." When all the people heard this, and the tax collectors too, they declared God just, having been baptized with the baptism of John. But the Pharisees and the lawyers rejected the purpose of God for themselves, not having been baptized by him. Now, we'll come back to this, but I just want to say, here's a guy who's doubting whether or not Jesus is who he says he is. And this is not just some guy. This is John the Baptist, all right? And he's having some questions about this guy named Jesus. Well, let's go back now and start towards the beginning of chapter 7 and look at this. So, reading all these stories then, there comes this we begin to have this sense of who Jesus is, a sense of reality. And now we come to, in the first part of chapter 7, where Jesus is accosted by a band of Jews who have been sent by a Roman centurion because his servant is sick and he wants Jesus to come and heal his servant. In the story there, Jesus then says, "I'm amazed at this man's faith." Let me read you this about a guy named Royal Robbins. Anybody heard of Royal Robbins? A professional mountain climber. Yeah. Anybody else? Royal Robbins. I'd never heard of the guy either, except that in the 50s and 60s, he was a master mountain climber. He's the one who at Yosemite climbed the front face of Half Dome with no pitons or drills or whatever, just all natural. He's done some amazing and phenomenal things, this guy. He's written 3 books, 3 volumes of his autobiography, and I really want to get them, but it would be too time-consuming because they're very gripping stories. So here's what he says, though, because he did some amazing, and let me just give you some background on why it gripped my attention. My son, in his senior year, went with 2 of his best friends to Yosemite, and they were just going to hang out for the weekend. This was just before senior graduation. I probably have told the story here before, but they're climbing up the face of the mountain up Yosemite. They're not the rock face, but they didn't take the path. They were going to make their own path. This is like how teenagers always do anyway. They're going to do it their own way. So they were making some progress. They were quite a ways up the mountain there, and this guy, Charles' best friend named Paul, was in front leading the way. They came to a place which was a bit of a jump, and Paul thought he could make it. He made the jump to grab the rock, and he couldn't get the ledge. He slid off the rock and about 300 feet down to his death. It was a crushing blow for Charles. Life-changing experience. Mom and Dad's only son, straight A student. So when I read this about this guy saying, I'm thinking, there's a whole lot of truth. Here's what he says. Again, he's been a professional mountain climber most of his life and done some incredible feats. He says, if we are keenly alert and aware of the rock and what we are doing on it, if we are honest with ourselves and our capabilities and weaknesses, if we avoid committing ourselves beyond what we know is safe, then we will climb safely. For climbing is an exercise in reality. He who sees it clearly is on the safe ground, regardless of his experience or skill. But he who sees reality as he would like it to be may have his illusions rudely stripped from his eyes when the ground comes up fast. There's a whole lot of truth in that. And may I say that there's a whole lot of truth in that with regard to our faith, too. The reality of faith. There's what we hope faith will be and what faith will do, but then there's the reality of it. And so this story of the centurion is about the reality of faith. This man is he's a Roman officer. He has people who are under him. He understands what it means to be a person in authority, to say, you go do that, you go do that. And they do it because he said so. And so Jesus then has been asked by the Jews who have said about this man, he's a good man. He's worthy. He's a man who's worthy of what you've done. And based on what he had done in protecting them as a nation, in building them a synagogue, he was lauded for things that for external things that made him look like he was a good person. As far as the Jews were concerned, for a Gentile to do, this guy was a great guy. So he was lauded for those things, which in their mind would earn a person their salvation. He deserved this. He's a worthy man. And for this reason, then, they felt that this centurion was entitled to Jesus visiting him and healing his servant, and they pleaded Jesus to do so. And we oftentimes have that feeling. We're entitled. We're good folks. We're righteous people. We try to do the right thing, and so we have this sense of entitlement, like God should do something good for me. Now, the centurion, though, for his part, and this is where the reality comes in, for his part, this man had a wholesome consciousness of his sin. He understood where he was at. And to have a wholesome consciousness of our sin and what we're like, it's a very healthy thing. You see, we like to distance ourselves from the great sinners of our time. Anybody familiar with the name Jeffrey Dahmer? Jeffrey Dahmer. He cut up human bodies, stored them in his refrigerator, and he ate them. We would say, really? How can somebody be so wicked? How can they be so despicable? And we don't like to think that we have the same potential in ourselves. We like to think, I think I'm a little bit better than that. There's also these, there's guys like Ted Bundy. Then you have the Columbine shooters and the Newtown murderer. What goes in a person's mind to take all these guns in and start shooting down these little kids? How does that happen? And we would say, I would never do such a thing. You don't know. If you had been in that man's situation, you don't know that you would not have reacted the same way. I'm saying to you that we are fundamentally at our core a wicked people. We're a fallen people. We have fallen as far as we can fall. We can't fall anymore. But for the redeeming power of Jesus Christ, we would all be in such a boat. And we like to think that we're not that way. We like to distance ourselves and say, I'm not that kind of person. I'm better than that. But when Adam and Eve fell into sin, we all fell to the farthest depths, but for the mercy of God. And so we need to remind ourselves, we need to re-examine again our perspective of who we are, what our abilities are. No one understands Jesus and his work of salvation if we're not intimately acquainted with our own evil nature. It's hard to appreciate this whole thing about being born again and being made new in Jesus Christ until we realize where we came from. What our evil nature is like. And so this centurion, he had a reality to his faith. He understood who he was, and he also understood Jesus and who Jesus was. So he says, as Jesus is coming to his house, these Jewish people, they say that I'm worthy of this. They want you to come. So as Jesus is going to the house, the centurion sends another party of people who says, oh no. He doesn't, the centurion says, he's not worthy of you to come. And so all he would like for you to say is, you tell the person, you tell whatever needs to be done to heal my servant. You don't need to come. He says, I understand authority. You have authority that, like, I understand. You tell someone to do this and they do that. You have the authority to cure my servant. You don't need to come here. I'm not worthy of your presence. There was a just a stark realization of who he was in comparison to who Jesus was. And though he was a Gentile, he recognized that Jesus could do things that God does. And here's the thing. In fact, if you'd like to look at that passage of Scripture, this is an amazing thing that Jesus says here. So, verse 9 says, when Jesus heard these things, he marveled at him. And turning to the crowd that followed him, he said, I tell you, not even in Israel have I found such faith. That word marvel, it's like utterly amazed. And I'm going, Jesus? Amazed? I mean, was he surprised? There's an element of surprise in that, like, whoa, where did this come from? How does this guy, a Gentile, how does he have this kind of faith? How does he know me? And Jesus, it's like he steps back in amazement. There's only one other time that word is used, and that was when Jesus was in his hometown, and he was amazed at their lack of faith. So the things that bring such amazement and surprise to Jesus is great faith or lack of faith, but having to do with faith. And so he says he's amazed at Jesus. I mean, at this centurion's faith. And so he heals this man's servant. The reason I say this is because it's a reality check. What's our faith like? Two things. Do we really know who we are? Do we really understand who Jesus is and what Jesus can do? And in case there's a question as to whether or not we have a sense of understanding what Jesus can do, look at this next story. This next story is also, to me, it's pretty fantastic. So, it's the story about how Jesus raises a widow's son, and he's going to a town called Nain. Now, you don't pass through Nain. It's not on the highway. Jesus wasn't going someplace else and happened to be going by this little village. If you're going to Nain, you're going to Nain. It's a dead end at the end of a little path. So he in this, and when you look at the story, it says, soon after he went to a town called Nain, and his disciples, and listen, it says, and a great crowd went with him. So you have Jesus, his band of disciples, and a great crowd. I don't know how many that is. You can put the number on it. It's a great crowd. I think we have a great crowd here, so maybe not in numbers, but you're a great crowd. So anyway, they're going up to this path, and however it works, when you're going uphill along the path, I imagine there's conversations taking place. But as they approach the town, they notice that there's a funeral procession coming out. Have you ever seen an old-fashioned funeral procession? I remember as a child watching the old funeral processions in our town in Chiayi. They were quite the affairs. And they always had a parade of mourners dressed in the mourners, and they would be wailing and just with great noise. And one of the reasons why the wailing, and you would hire the wailers, was not the criers, was not so much so that you could impress other people with how sad they are, but so that you could also be able to express your grief and not be so alone in it. You'd have this freedom to express your grief because there's a lot of other people doing it too, and that seems like such a sane way to take care of grief, to say, hey, can I pay you to cry with me? And to go through this. And so there's this procession that's coming out of the town there. And verse 13 says, when the Lord saw her, the widow, he had compassion on her, and he said, do not weep. She's a widow who's losing her only child. And Jesus sees this, and he has this great compassion. So, as these two crowds are coming to each other, Jesus approaches, and first of all approaches the mom and says, do not weep. And then he does something that no Jew ever does. He goes up and he touches the deathbed. You know, we saw in the book of Leviticus, that's, you don't go near death. Dead animals, you don't touch even dead animals. And if you're a priest and you touch dead animals, then you're unclean and that whole thing. And so the Jews don't do that. But Jesus walks up and he touches. And as soon as he touches that, it's like, and things stop. The parade stops. Procession stops. And he looks at that boy who is covered in the shroud as being prepared for, having been prepared for burial. And he says to him, get up. Really, folks? Maybe it's me. But who looks at a dead body and say, get up? You've got to be somebody to do that. Wouldn't you agree? And so what I'm saying to you, Luke is telling this story again. And here we are 2,000 years later, and we're listening to this story like, nobody's surprised? Nobody's amazed? Here comes a dead person. When's the last time you went to a funeral and said, get up? When did we even have that thought? There's such a finality to death. There's such a certainty to death. There's no turning back from death. And Jesus walks up, stops the procession, says to the boy, get up. And the amazing thing is, he got up. It's not so amazing saying it. Anybody can say it. Can you imagine what's going on now in this funeral procession? All these mourners who stopped a moment from their wailing, and they're going, ah! He's standing up. He's alive. How did that happen? Who in the world is this guy? He must be some kind of prophet. This is God. He's in our midst. God's come to us. Yeah, of course. And so what I'm saying to you, this is a really fantastic story, and it's the reality of God in our midst, because life is the result from God living amongst us. Life is what comes to our life and to us when he touches us and he lives amongst us, because he's alive. It's important for Luke to have gone and done this research and to heard this story. And who knows, I know this story would have gone viral if it was on the internet. It'd be all over Facebook and every other social network out there, whatever it is. In no time it would be out there. Of course it would be. And then maybe there might be some additions and so forth. But this is listen, there's no embellishments here. This is a very simple story. We're told that he says to her, stop, don't weep. He touches the bier, the deathbed, and he says to the boy, get up. The boy gets up and there's rejoicing and they're amazed, of course. And life goes on. Life goes on. It's astounding to me. And the thing is, how many times have I read through these Gospels and read through these stories, and from the time I was a child, I've heard about the widow of Nain and her boy being raised up, and it's just like, yeah, okay, it's another Bible story. Whoopie-doo, it's another Bible story. But when we stop to think about it, this is a story that carried down through the ages that Luke wrote down, and it's come down to us today. Does it make a single bit of difference in our lives that Jesus raised this kid for his widowed mother? What does it mean when we say God is with us? Is it the same old humdrum, life as usual, back to work, 8 a.m., this kind of thing? Does it make no difference whatsoever to us that God lives in our midst? Those are good questions. You know why they're good questions? Because John the Baptist asked the same thing. And if somebody as spiritual as John the Baptist is, has got a problem with whether or not Jesus is who he says he is, then, hey, I'm figuring, of course, if I don't get it, I don't get it. John the Baptist didn't get it. Are you with me here? Am I the only one that's so confused? I'm not confused. I'm not confused. So, John the Baptist, he was the forerunner, and we went through his story, and we talked about how he had this amazing birth from a mother who shouldn't have been giving birth to babies. She was in her very old, very late in age, both her and her husband, and so here comes John the Baptist, and he's got this special role. He knows who he is. He told the Pharisees, I'm the one who is called by Isaiah to prepare the way of the Lord. This I know who I'm at. And he knows that his birth was announced by Gabriel. He knows that Jesus came to him. Jesus was baptized by him. He tells in his own words how he saw the Spirit of God alight on Jesus. Now, some say it was a dove. Some say it was like a dove. It doesn't matter. The Spirit of God came upon Jesus. He saw that. He heard the voice from heaven saying, this is my son whom I'm... All of this is a part of his experience. And now, you see, he's hearing from... John the Baptist was a very strong preacher. When he heard about sin, he says, that's sin. You can't do that. It didn't matter who it was, even if it was the mayor or the president or whoever it was, happened to be the king. And he told the king, you are an adulterer. You're under God's judgment. You have taken your brother's wife in an adulterous relationship, and you're mocking God. And man, I mean, he preached that thing until Herod says, I've had enough of this thing. I'm the king. I'll do what I want to. And he shut him up in prison. Languishing in prison there, and he keeps hearing these stories about this guy named Jesus, whom he baptized. He baptized him. And first of all, you might have said, hey, hear that guy Jesus? I baptized him. But he's still languishing in prison. It seems like nobody knows about, like, John who? Who you? And he's still got a cluster of disciples, of people who follow him. And yet, he's in this prison, and Jesus never shows up. Hey, I'm the one who introduced you into ministry. I'm the one who Isaiah said came to prepare the way for you. Hey! And look at all these things that you're doing. Everybody's following after you, and you're not saying a thing about me? I don't know if John's going that way or not. He's probably a little bit more mature than that. But he's got some thoughts going through his mind. He's got to have some questions. Because he says to his disciples, I'm not sure. Is this guy really the one we're looking for? Or is it another? And he's languishing in this prison. It's as if Jesus has forgotten him. And so he sends two of his disciples to go and find out if Jesus is who he says he is. I mean, it's kind of interesting because you go and ask the guy whom you baptized, are you really who you say you are? What's he going to say? Oh, no, I'm not that guy. What's he expecting? But he needs some kind of confidence, some kind of verification. He needs to have something he can hold on to and understand that where he's at, what he's suffering, what he's going through, it's not for naught, it's not for reason, he's not forgotten. John wonders. So, I got to say to you this. I think it's okay to say, Jesus, I need you to show up. I need to see Jesus in my life. I need to know that you're with us, with me, that I'm not in this alone. And I think that's where the cry of John's heart was. He doesn't know why that no deliverance has been given to him. And here's a guy who has power over death. All Jesus had to do was go, you're out, bro. And he'd be out. He didn't even have to do that. All he had to do was think it. And it would have been done. And nothing. there's a couple of things I look at this. Why does John have these doubts? One of the reasons is because Jesus isn't doing what he expected. Jesus isn't doing what he expected. What did he expect? Hey, he's a Jew. He's been announcing the kingdom is here. He's expecting Jesus is going to knock out these Roman occupiers, and they're going to set up their kingdom. It's going to be reinstated again. That's what the Messiah is about. He's here. He's from the throne of David. So this isn't taking place. He also expected that someone would be a little bit more fierce against sin. Because he said about Jesus, he's going to be like a fire that's going to cleanse this place. And what does he do? He goes around forgiving sin. And so John is going, really? You're the one? Because it's not happening like he expected it to happen. A tremendous lesson for us to learn here is this. God doesn't have to do what we expect. That doesn't mean he's not here. It means he didn't do what we expected. We need to step back and say, all right, God, I need you to show me. Too often, and again, it happens. We like to write down our plans, and here's the things like I told you. You need to have a New Year's resolution for next year, this year, and next year, and the next year. But you need to have a New Year's resolution. But I say that, but I also understand this, that sometimes we write down on our paper what we want God to do, like he's our servant. He's our lackey. And we say, God, you got to do this. The last church I was at, they asked me if I had a plan. And I said, this is my first time doing pastoring in the U.S. I have no idea how things will happen in the U.S. But I said, I have an idea, but really what I've done is I've tried to give God a blank piece of paper, and I'm asking him to write it. And he did. He wrote some amazing things. And there you go again. God wrote on your paper, But I think it's important for us that though we plan, that God he's not obligated to fulfill our expectation of him. And sometimes that's a very difficult thing to accept. Very difficult thing to accept. You find that you have made some decisions and you've made some moves and you think that you're doing what God wants you to do, and because you think you're doing what God wants you to do, then God's got certain obligations on his part. Doesn't come through. And you're going, well, I thought, and it doesn't happen because of expectations. And so that's when John sends his disciples to Jesus and says to Jesus, who are you? It's interesting then, maybe that when he's going there, in addition to expectation, there might be a sense of entitlement. I have been observing so much lately about our attitudes towards entitlement, especially as a foreigner in this country, and watching how foreigners sometimes act in this country. It's like we have this idea that, hey, we're entitled to this because I'm a foreigner. Really? You don't even belong here. You think you're entitled? But sometimes, folks, because of who we are, we get this idea that we're entitled to certain things that we just expect. And we have to be careful that we don't allow entitlement to overcome us. There's a real importance, I think, in being humble. And let me use a bad illustration from me, okay? I just moved to a new place, and in this new place, there's a little tiny gate that you have to get through, and I have a big fat car, okay? So I have a big fat car. I'm trying to get in this little tiny gate, and there's cars on all over the side. And so this guy comes and he parks outside the gate with half his rear end then in the gate, and I got to back this big fat car back in so I can unload. So I got out and I said it in English because I was ticked. When I'm ticked, I wanted them to know. So I got out and I said, do you understand? I mean, I was trying to back in. This guy zipped in. He's going to park. And I said, do you understand I'm trying to get in here? And you're going to park right here? He goes, oh, it'll only be an hour and I'll leave. So I said, okay, if you don't care. My point is this. I felt like I was entitled to show myself as a foreigner speaking English, to show my anger. I was wrong. My daughter, bless her heart, said, Dad, that was a terrible thing to do. You're like some arrogant foreigner. I go, you're right. I was trying to prove it. But my point is this. We sense that we have this entitlement, like we deserve something. We're worthy of it. And I'm wondering if John may not have had a twinge of that thinking, like we deserve more from God. So, Jesus replies quickly in a twofold way. One, he says, what you see. Tell John what you see and what you hear. What you see. What had Jesus been doing? The Bible tells us the blind were seeing, the sick were being healed, demons were being cast out. He had just raised a boy from the dead and so forth. And he says, tell John what you're seeing. Hey, listen, I got to say to you this. If this Christianity stuff, if this stuff is real, then Jesus must be real. If Jesus is real, then he needs to be in our lives somewhere, folks. Our lives cannot be so ordinary that Jesus is not a part of it. Our lives have to be in such a way that we can say, I can see Jesus at work in my life. You know the reason why we may have doubts and questions about whether or not this Jesus guy is who he says he is? Because he never shows up in our life because maybe we're not looking, or maybe we're expecting him to do one thing and he's not doing it. And so Jesus, without giving any kind of apologetic for who he is or what he says, look and see what I'm doing. And there comes a time when we need to step back and say, I see. God's working in certain ways and doing things I never expected. I never thought. I couldn't see it was there, but God's at work. Jesus is here. But then he also says what the Bible says, what you see and what you hear. And I won't go through the scriptures now. You can go back and look at it, but at least 4 separate texts from Isaiah Jesus used in giving an answer about John the Baptist. And when he was also talking about the blind can see, the dead are raised. These are all things that Isaiah said the Messiah was going to do. And so he uses this scripture and he says, listen, look and hear what's being done. Understand what the scriptures say. And the same is true for us, folks. We need to hear what Jesus is saying. Listen to what his word, let his word speak to us. If we believe this Christianity stuff is real, we believe that Jesus is living, the Bible is a living book. A living book. Now, let me just finish with this last thing that the last story in chapter 7 very quickly. Again, this is a very interesting story because Jesus is invited to go to a Pharisee's house for a feast. Typically in the Middle East, then the house would be kind of a courtyard, and they would set up the eating area out in the courtyard, and there would be traffic in and out through the courtyard. I can remember, again, I associate so much of my childhood growing up here in Taiwan. I can see what's going on because you go to these feasts, and because like our family, we would be the special guest. Well, all the neighbors, they would just kind of stroll on in through, and take a look. They would and chat and point and see and so forth like this while we're having this feast in this family's house or in the restaurant and so forth. And so I can imagine this is what's going on here because the Pharisee asked Jesus to come. And along comes this woman, and this woman, she's recognizable. She's recognizable. It could be that she's married to a husband that has a very evil reputation because she was recognized as being a sinner. Or, which is more likely, she's probably a prostitute and known to be one. So she comes in, and she finds Jesus where he's laying. And in those days, they didn't sit in chairs because they tried to keep the feet as far away from the table as possible. Good idea for teenagers. keep the feet away from the table. They wouldn't put them underneath the table. So they lay down on their left arm and they eat with their right hand and on these couches and so forth. When a person comes to your house, the thing that you do is they would take off their sandals and you would have a servant wash their feet and so forth, so that then they could put on clean shoes and go to the table there. And then you would allow them to put oil on their face to some comfort. And this guy did none of that. Even though Jesus was his guest, invited guest, he did none of that. That was quite an affront. That was like in your face. Like, I don't like you, but you're my guest. So then this woman comes in, and she finds Jesus, probably because his feet are the dirtiest ones there. And so she then, I don't know that she intended for this to happen, but she's moved with such emotion. I mean, just wells up within her because she knows who Jesus is. She knows who Jesus, and she knows that Jesus can heal her from what's wrong with her. And it wasn't a physical sickness. There was a deep spiritual problem, emotional problem with her that she knew Jesus. And so she's overcome with emotion, begins to cry, and she sees how these tears begin to drop on Jesus' dusty feet, and there's these streaks of her tears. And now what does she do? She doesn't have anything to dry them off. She takes her hair and she looses her hair in public. For the Jews, that was the same as if she had opened up her blouse. It was intended only for a married relationship. A woman would only let her hair down in her husband's presence. And here she takes her hair and lets it down and begins to wipe Jesus' feet there. As I read it, I get very uncomfortable with the whole scene there. It bothers me. And yet Jesus is so accepting of it. He doesn't say a thing to her, does he? He doesn't say a thing to her. But he notices what's going on around the table. He notices the scorn and the contempt. I mean, everybody calls him the prophet now. And it's like, if he's a prophet, he must know that this is a sinner. No prophet would let a sinner do this. And I would have to say, even for John the Baptist. I mean, John the Baptist would have been quite affronted by that too. He wouldn't let that happen. He was a hard guy. And here now Jesus is having his feet washed with the tears of a prostitute and dried with her hair. And she takes an alabaster box and opens it up, fills the whole area there with the fragrance, and begins to anoint Jesus with it. This has just gone a little too far. So Jesus lets it go, and then he says to Simon, he says, you know what? You didn't do anything for me when I came into your house. You were unkind. You didn't wash my feet. You didn't give me oil for my feet. You completely ignored me. And now this woman has washed my feet with her tears, wiped them with her hair. She had nothing available to her, and yet she took what she had. And so Jesus uses the parable. Somebody has a loan of, say, $500,000. Another person has a loan of $50,000. Neither one can pay. So the owner of the loan says, I forgive you both. Which one loves the owner most? Obviously, the one to whom he forgave most. Simon, the Pharisee, he got that right off. And Jesus says, you're right. You know what your problem is, Simon? You're too stinking self-righteous. You don't realize how much of a sinner you are. This woman understands. She loves me because she knows who she is. Here we see the reality of forgiveness. He said, woman, your sins are forgiven. This is just, to me, chapter 7 is a huge chapter. We've kind of clipped the top of the mountaintops. But there's some important things. Is Jesus who he says he is? And we have to look at the reality of the facts, the reality of faith, the reality of his power in raising people from the dead, the reality of forgiveness, and the reality of his word and who he says he is. John is not the only person who's ever been puzzled and disappointed with Jesus. Many of us today would say the same thing if we'd be honest. Like, I needed you to show up, Jesus, and you didn't. Yeah, but it's not that he doesn't care and he doesn't love. He just didn't fit our expectations, and we have to let God be God. We have to ask ourselves, do we understand who we are? Only when we understand the depth of our depravity and sin can we fully appreciate what Jesus has done for us. Can we truly love him? Do we see our weaknesses? Do we see our how much we need his presence, his enablement? Do we understand the danger of sin within us and what it does? We need to come to him for salvation, restoration, and strengthening. There's a reality that we have to accept. And John did too. Because when his disciples went back to him and they told him who Jesus was, he accepted. And he didn't get out of jail. In fact it wasn't much longer, and he had his head cut off. What a horrible thing to do to the guy who introduced you into the ministry. God's plan. And you know what you say, well, that's pretty cavalier. You just say, oh, it's God's plan. Yeah, I feel very confident in doing that. You know why? Because I think that he's bigger than me. I think he knows more than me. And I think that he's a loving God who knows what's best. I feel confident doing it. That's why there's some people, you know, you know them and you just say, hey, I trust them. I believe them. But I can say that about God. And you can't. Heavenly Father, we need a reality check ourselves. We need to look at this Bible and some of these stories and say, wow, what does that mean today? And we need to look at them beyond just being some kind of Bible story. We need to look at them as being facts that point us to you, point us to the lordship of Jesus Christ and the fact that you came and bridged that gap, and you came to us, and you took our sins upon you, and you've given us in exchange your life. We have so much to learn, Lord. There's so much that we failed in, and yet we realize that you're the one. You're the only one who can make the change in our life that we need to have. So we humbly come to you. And Lord, you know, we may ask the question, are you who you say you are? And we can ask the question, Jesus, where are you? And we can trust that you're who you say you are. So I pray, Father, that for us today who have maybe been Christians for a long time, that you would give us a new outlook and looking for Jesus and how you work in our lives. If we're here today and we're to say, you know, I'm not really a believer, I'm not a Jesus follower, I pray we'd just seriously consider that, you know, this is no joke. This is not a book of fairy tales. There's validity to what's being said, and it speaks to us today. And I pray, Lord, that there'd be an honest consideration of what Jesus does when he comes to us and he forgives us for our sin. He cleanses us from all unrighteousness. You make us whole again. You make the difference. And I pray that we can see that in a very real way in our life. I want to thank you for these scriptures